They said Africa couldn't rise. They said Burkina Faso was too small, too poor, too broken to matter. But on May 22nd, 2025, everything changed. In a village forgotten by maps, surrounded by crimson dust and silence, a factory emerged. Not just any factory. A $1.5 million weapon against a global trade system designed to keep Africa in chains. And it didn't rise for gold or oil or the coveted cashew nut. It rose for a fruit the world calls trash. The cashew apple. For decades, this vibrant fruit, richer in vitamin C than oranges bursting with aroma, lay rotting under trees, billions thrown away, ignored, erased from value, but not anymore. President Ibrahim Traoré did the unthinkable. He bet on the discarded. He launched a revolution with a juice bottle. And what that bottle represents, it's not just a product, it's a warning, a defiance, a declaration. Because when Africa dares to process its own bottle, its own brand, its own power shifts, systems tremble, the world blinks. This is not charity, this is war. A war for dignity, for sovereignty, for truth. And it all begins with a fruit the world forgot. So watch closely, share this story, because what's rising from the red soil of Penny isn't just cashew juice, it's Africa's revenge. Subscribe, like, comment if you believe in African power. This is more than a video. This is a manifesto. In the villages of southwestern Burkina Faso during harvest season, the ground beneath the trees is littered like scraps after a forgotten feast. Locals know the sweet, slightly fermented smell. Some children bite into them, others don't bother. These fruits were never part of the plan. The world didn't come for the apples. It came for the core, the hard nut inside. That was the export. That's what Europe wanted for snacks, what India needed for sweets. No one asked about the fruit, so Burkina Faso never answered. And it wasn't just a missed opportunity. It became a habit. Farmers would collect the nuts, crack them, bag them, and toss the apples aside. Some tried to ferment them into local drinks. Others fed them to livestock. But no one weighed them. No one believed they were worth anything. Over time, a whole generation accepted a strange logic: we grow two things but sell only one. We bury the other in the soil. Yet the cashew apple was never worthless. It is one of the richest fruits in vitamin C on earth, more than oranges, juicy, tangy, fragrant. It can be fermented into wine, distilled into spirits, pressed into vinegar. In Brazil, entire industries were built on it. India bottles its juice. But in Burkina Faso, it remained a ghost fruit seen but never truly valued. So why didn't things change sooner? Because global agriculture doesn't reward potential, it rewards systems. For Burkina Faso to profit from the cashew fruit, it would need machines, cold chains, distribution, packaging, and above all, belief. Not belief in the fruit, but in itself. In a post-colonial economy trained into export dependency, that kind of belief is rare. And let's be honest, cashew apples are hard to process. They bruise easily, ferment fast, and without a processing unit nearby, they spoil before they leave the farm. So farmers stuck with what worked: sell the nut, discard the fruit. But as global food trends began shifting towards superfoods, exotic flavors, and natural drinks, the world slowly began to crave what Burkina Faso had long ignored. Cashew juice appeared on European health blogs. Cashew wine gained traction in South Asia. Small trials showed huge demand, but Burkina Faso wasn't ready. Then came the numbers, cold, humbling. A Cephacod study revealed the country produces around 400,000 tons of cashew apples annually, almost all of it wasted. Even worse, despite a processing capacity of 30,000 tons of nuts, only 16,000 were actually processed in 2024. The harvest was there. The infrastructure existed. But the system lagged behind. A disconnection haunted policymakers between abundance and use, between potential and paralysis. Something had to break the cycle. Not just another farm project. Not just another report. But something physical, industrial, symbolic. A bold act of economic imagination. That's when the idea of Penny was born. A place where fruit would no longer rot. Where value would be captured, not shipped out raw. A facility not for the nut, but for the forgotten half of the cashew. The tree's gift. And so the fruit that had silently died under the canopies for 50 years is now being revived. But that leads to bigger questions. What exactly is being built? Who is behind it? And how will this factory turn a ghost fruit into a national symbol? Let's head to Penny and see what's rising from the red soil. Driving west from Bobo Dioulasso, the landscape unfolds into dry shrub farms and deep red soil, the kind of place that was never in the headlines. Until now. Because in Penny, a quiet town among Burkina Faso's cashew-growing zones, something massive is rising: a $1.5 million cashew processing plant. But this isn't a typical agricultural project. There are no donor logos, no foreign advisors holding clipboards. This project is different. It was personally initiated by President Ibrahim Traoré on May 22, 2025. The message is loud and clear. How do you feel about Traoré investing in a fruit the world called waste? Comment below. This isn't charity. It's strategy. And it's theirs. What makes the Penny facility different isn't just what it will do, but what it represents. On a technical level, the plant is designed to process 5,000 tons of cashew products per year. But not in the way most expect. It will not focus on cashew nuts, the global cash crop shipped in containers from Cotonou or Abidjan to buyers in India and Vietnam. It will focus on the forgotten side of the harvest, the cashew apple. With specialized equipment and dedicated processing lines, the factory will produce juice, wine, vinegar, and spirits, an entire category of products that has never existed at scale within the country. This isn't just about adding value. It's about creating value from nothing. And even more critically, it's about owning the means of transformation. For decades, Burkina Faso exported raw cashew nuts. But the real value happened overseas: cracking, cleaning, roasting, packaging, branding. That's where profits exploded. That's where jobs were created. And that's where Africa always lost out. But with Penny, that chain is breaking. Here's how every year the factory will inject over $867,000 directly into the rural economy just through the purchase of raw cashew apples. That means guaranteed demand for local farmers, not the unstable prices of international buyers. No risk of spoilage or rejection at foreign ports, only local stability. And that shift unlocked something else: power. If Burkina Faso can control its own cashew processing, it no longer has to beg for favorable trade terms. It can negotiate from strength. Yet, beyond economics, the factory sends another signal: something political. Its scale, its ambition, even its location, all intentional. Penny is not the capital. It's not a logistics hub. It's rural. It's raw. It was overlooked. And that's the point. Placing a high-tech processing unit here redraws the map. It redefines where power is allowed to exist. It's a declaration. Development doesn't just belong to Ouagadougou. It belongs to the farmer, the producer, the land that's fed the nation but never shared in its wealth. And Penny is not meant to stand alone. According to the Burkina Faso Council for Agriculture and Fisheries (CBF), which oversees the project, this is only the beginning. Penny is designed as a model unit, a proof of concept. If successful, it could lead to dozens of similar factories across other cashew-growing regions and beyond, from cashew to mango, sorghum, even cotton byproducts. A fully industrial agricultural future not born from foreign aid but from national will. But perhaps the most radical aspect of Penny is its timing. This factory is being inaugurated at a moment when Burkina Faso, under Ibrahim Traoré, is redefining sovereignty militarily, financially, and now agriculturally. It's no coincidence that the same government pushing for monetary independence, building a gold refinery, and launching a national postal bank, is also building processing plants. These aren't isolated projects. They are links in a growing chain of self-reliance. Penny is Burkina Faso's way of saying, we have stopped exporting poverty disguised as trade. We are building wealth from scratch. But no building, no matter how symbolic, can succeed on its own. It needs people who believe in it. It needs systems that support it. And it needs minds ready to unlearn decades of dependence. Because building a factory is one thing. Getting a nation to believe in what it can produce is another. When a country like Burkina Faso builds a facility in a town like Penny, it's not just pressing fruit. It's pushing a button. And right now, this quiet town is sending silent alarms through global trade circles. Because Penny's upcoming products, cashew, juice, vinegar, wine, aren't just food items. They are signals of disruption. The world has long been structured to assign value by geography. Africa grows, Asia processes, the West consumes. That was the order. And for decades Burkina Faso played its role, exporting raw cashew nuts to processors in Vietnam and India who polished, branded and sold them in Europe and North America at 3, sometimes 4 times the original price. In that system, Burkina Faso was essential but replaceable. It supplied the raw material but never controlled the cash flow, the technology transfer or the branding power. And the cruel irony, without African farmers none of it would exist. Yet those very farmers stayed poor while every link in the chain grew wealthier. Penny is about to break that cycle. Not by shouting, but by producing something the global trade system has never seen: bottom-up competition. Subscribe and comment Amen if you support Traoré's vision for African power. Let's consider this. In 2024 alone, Burkina Faso earned $111 million from exporting raw cashew nuts. Sounds impressive until you realize that once those nuts are processed, packaged and retailed in Europe or Asia, they generate hundreds of millions more for someone else. Money that never comes back. It never builds roads. It never funds clinics. It never pays school fees for the farmer's child. It simply vanishes, extracted in plain sight. But a locally owned processing plant in Penny changes that. For the first time, it introduces value-added products that weren't even part of the conversation before. Juice for the health market, artisanal vinegar for luxury shelves, cashew wine, a bold new product from a place no one expected. A rising trend in South Asia is now reborn with a West African identity. These are not low-value exports. They are premium, they are niche, and they are demanded with longer shelf lives, higher profit margins, and an appeal that stretches far beyond the continent. Third Penny introduces price resilience. When Burkina Faso only exported raw nuts, it had no control over pricing. If Vietnam offered just 1 cent cheaper, buyers would switch. If India tightened a trade deal, shipments halted. Burkina Faso was always vulnerable to the market. But now the leverage shifts. With local processing, Burkina Faso can say, "We'll sell you nuts, but we're keeping some for ourselves. And this year we're exporting juice." It reduces vulnerability. It gives the country bargaining power. It sends a clear message to the middlemen: you are no longer the only route. Fourth Penny sets a new benchmark for regional trade. This is not just about Europe or Asia. Burkina Faso is now exporting cashew juice to Senegal, to Mali, to Ghana. Imagine African airlines serving Burkina Bay cashew wine. Suddenly this continent isn't just a stopover between harvest and export, it becomes its own market. Intra-African trade begins to rise. Old dependencies on former colonial economies begin to fade. To global companies that have grown fat off Africa's predictable exports, this isn't a ripple. It's a threat. Because when one nation starts processing its own goods, others start asking, why don't we? Ghana with cocoa, Nigeria with palm oil, Ivory Coast with rubber. The logic of raw export begins to crack. And when that logic breaks, so does the financial architecture built on top of it. Trade brokers lose leverage. Shipping routes are rerouted. Asian processing hubs suddenly face competition from the very soil that grows the crops. Western importers can no longer dictate terms so easily. That's the domino effect set off, not by parliaments, not by protests, but by machines slicing apples into coins. And this revolution won't look loud. It won't come with slogans or summits. It won't break into primetime news. It will appear quietly on supermarket shelves, with a new taste, in a shifting supply chain. And the same villagers who once picked up cashew apples just to toss them aside will now be bottling the world's newest luxury drinks. That's how a single bottle of cashew juice can begin to undo years of economic injustice, quietly, sweetly, powerfully. But even with all this change underway, one barrier still looms: belief. Not belief from investors, not belief from export partners, but belief from within. Because as this factory prepares to challenge global norms, its hardest battle is still at home. Machines are arriving: pipes, boilers, fermenters, conveyors. They will hum with promise. They will produce bottles. And with each liter, they will quietly declare, Burkina Faso is now in the business of transformation. But long before the first drop of cashew juice is sealed, one question lingers. and it's both simple and urgent. Do the people believe? Because the hard truth is machines don't change a nation, people do. And right now the mindset needed to sustain the cashew revolution is still lagging behind the steel and circuitry designed to power it. For generations, farmers, traders, even policymakers in Burkina Faso's cashew belt have been trained consciously or not to see their country as merely a source of raw materials. Burkina Faso's role was to supply cotton, gold, livestock, cashews. What happened after those goods crossed the border was someone else's concern. Roasting, packaging, branding, marketing, those belonged elsewhere. Usually in Europe, sometimes in Asia, rarely here. That belief became so deeply rooted, it turned into a kind of national reflex. You farm, you sell, you wait, you hope for a good price. You never expect more. But penny demands the opposite. It asks farmers to become entrepreneurs. It asks cooperatives to act like integrated supply chains. It asks local business owners to think in terms of bottling, distribution, shelf life, and branding. It asks teachers to treat food science as patriotism. It asks schools to teach agriculture not just as agronomy but as industry. And yes, it asks consumers, ordinary Burkinabés, to play their part by choosing when they walk past a store shelf to pick up that bottle of cashew wine, not because it's cheaper but because it's theirs. That's no small ask. Because while infrastructure can be imported, confidence cannot. And for a nation that has spent decades exporting its wealth and importing its value, the leap from grower to industrial actor is not intuitive. It must be built, taught, believed in, again and again. And then there's the bureaucracy. Like many post-colonial economies, Burkina Faso's state machinery often moves slower than the ambition of its people. Licensing, tax registration, quality checks, export permits. Each of these steps can become a barrier unless the system itself is recalibrated to reward local transformation. A farmer might scale up faster than the market can absorb. A factory might produce more than the ports can process. If alignment is missing, progress becomes frustrating. And then there's the packaging, the branding. For value-added products, these aren't optional extras, they're essentials. But Burkina Faso currently has no domestic supplier for glass bottles, labels, caps, QR codes for traceability. So even if the juice is born from local soil, its container may come from elsewhere. And that means the dream of self-sufficiency begins to wobble. Costs creep up. Margins shrink. Unless local industries grow in sync with the model, the transformation risks being slowly eroded. And it doesn't stop at infrastructure. Even the consumers themselves need to be retrained. In many African countries, imported means better. A drink from France, prestige. A wine from South Africa, trustworthy. But a bottle stamped made in Burkina Faso, that trust still needs to be built inch by inch. This is not a supply chain problem. It's a psychological one. A deep-rooted insecurity harder to fix than any technical flaw. So how do you dismantle that invisible wall? You don't just build a factory. You build stories. You don't just buy machines. You invest in minds. You train communities to see labor not just as survival but as strategy. You celebrate the launch of cashew vinegar with the same pride as a rocket launch because, in a nation reclaiming its economic sovereignty, the stakes are just as high. And above all, you build networks. You connect farmers to buyers, buyers to transporters, transporters to exporters, exporters to regulators. Because a cashew apple doesn't become a product until everyone in that chain stops seeing themselves as servants of the market and starts seeing themselves as stakeholders in a national mission. And that's the deeper risk. Because while the penny factory may have the steel without training belief and shifting mindset, it could become yet another monument to what might have been. Which brings us to the final, most important question of all. Can a factory change a nation? The machines may soon begin to hum. The farmers may be ready, the mindset may be shifting, but beneath the clang of metal and the buzz of optimism, a quieter question still lingers. No blueprint, no funding round, no policy can fully answer it. Can a cashew apple teach Africa to dream bigger? At first glance, it seems like a strange question to ask a fruit, but look closer. The cashew apple is not just a byproduct, it is a symbol. A metaphor for everything Africa has been told to ignore about itself, bright, rich, full of potential, left to rot. Not because it lacked value, but because the systems that define value were never built for it. Sound familiar? For decades, African nations have played roles in other people's economies, growing, mining, shipping, and waiting for the world to decide what they're worth. That model breeds submission, sometimes even dependence. But now and then something breaks it, a single act, a single project, a single moment bold enough to ask, what if the value was never lost? Penny's cashew plant is such a moment. Because when Burkina Faso decided not to export those apples, but to bottle them, ferment them, label them, it challenged the assumption of an entire continent, that Africa's job is to harvest, not to transform. A fruit once forgotten is now rewriting the future. Penny is more than a factory. It's a statement that Africa is done waiting, that we will no longer ship our power and import our worth. Every drop of cashew juice is more than flavor. It's proof that we can rise, that we can create, that we can lead. And now, it's your turn. If this story moves something in you, don't let it end here. Hit like to honor the farmers who never gave up. Leave a comment, say I believe if you see a new Africa rising. And subscribe not just to this channel but to the dream of a continent reclaiming its voice. Because this isn't just about cashew juice. This is about us. From the soil to the shelf, from silence to sovereignty, we are rising. And the world better be ready.